Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we venture into the realm of the supernatural, and all things that defy explanation. So prepare to get creeped out, and let the darkness take control. 12 years ago, my brother died. And for that whole first year, a lot of super weird shit happened to our family. The only conclusion I can come to, and I do really believe this, was that he was trying to contact us. A week after his funeral, my mum was home by herself, and the phone rang. This was about 2 p.m. The caller ID said that it was my brother's house, so she figured it was my sister-in-law. My mother answered, and when she said hello, there was no sound on the other end, and no one answered. She repeated herself and said hello again, with still no answer. Then the call disconnected. She waited until about 6 p.m. when my sister-in-law came home from work, and she called her to ask if she'd come home from work and called her earlier. My sister-in-law said no. She asked if the kids had come home early. My sister-in-law asked my niece and nephew if they had come home to call Gran in the middle of the day, and neither of them had. They were in school the whole time until the end of the day. The phone was mounted to the kitchen wall, and the receiver was on the hook. So it's not like the dog knocked it over, accidentally stepped on dials. We think it was my brother, making contact to let my mum know he was still around. My sister-in-law is an amazing cook, and she has many kitchen utensils and tools that are very specialized, that you only use for one thing. For example, a certain knife you'd use for fish or some stuff. Over the course of that first year he was gone, many of the utensils that my sister-in-law would use to make my brother's favorite dishes started to disappear. She didn't loan them out. No one borrowed them. I mean, why would they? I asked a friend of mine, who's really into the supernatural, about it. She said, "Does your sister-in-law believes in ghosts and such?" I said, "No, she's super no-nonsense and really doesn't believe." She said, "That's the problem. He's trying to get her attention. He wants her to talk to him. He misses her. He's trying to let her know that he's still around." A year after my brother died, my dad's girlfriend's father died. And a year after that, she was still having a lot of problems coping with her father's death. So, she went to a psychic to see if she could make contact with him. So the psychic tells her all the things she wants to hear. Yes, of course, your dad is in the room, etc., etc. Stuff that anyone could say to her. Then the psychic says, "Your dad's here, but there's a much younger man with him also. He's very tall and thin, with dark hair and glasses." Normally, my dad's girlfriend would have thought of my brother, but she was having such a hard time coping with the loss of their dad that she just didn't make the connection to my brother at that exact moment. So she said, "That doesn't sound like anyone I know." The psychic then said, "Who's James?" My dad's girlfriend said, "He's my companion." And the psychic said, "The younger man has a message for James." He said, "Please tell my dad that I'm okay." She realized that it was my brother trying to get a message to my dad. The psychic knew nothing about my brother's death. My dad's girlfriend was strictly there to talk about her father. 2 months after my brother died, I was kind of having a really bad day about his death. It was still very soon, and I was still grieving. I went out to Target in my local neighborhood to run some errands. Saturday morning, very early, right when they opened. And on this particular day, I had my hair up in a ponytail. I was going up the elevator to the second level, and suddenly I felt someone tug my ponytail, just in a friendly manner, like you'd tap someone on the shoulder. There was one girl I worked with who lived in my neighborhood, and I thought, that early on a Sunday in this neighborhood, it could only be her. So I turned around, expecting to see my co-worker behind me with a big grin on her face. And I was alone on the escalator. There was no one else on there with me, and the store was still mostly empty. 9 months after he died, I was in bed sleeping, and it had to be around 3 a.m. or so. Suddenly, I felt someone sit on the edge of my mattress. I actually felt the weight of this person sit down. I felt the edge of the mattress dip. I gasped, because naturally, I figured someone had broken into my bedroom and thought I was about to get attacked or something. I was laying on my stomach, and before I could roll over and see who it was, I felt this person lean up against me, very gently, like they were trying to hug me without waking me up, and rest their cheek on my hair. I couldn't see anything, but at that point, I bolted upright and screamed and snapped on the light. There was no one there. You know, I swear on my life, to this day, I could feel this person lightly hugging me. I could feel their cheek against my hair. I felt the mattress dip where they sat. It's been 12 years since he died, and to this day, there's no way to explain any of this. When I was younger, my mum was dating this guy, JB. And after a few months, he invited my mum, me, and my brother to go with him and his son, who was about my age, out to his lake house for the weekend. It was right on Lake Michigan, but up in a more secluded area, which was pretty awesome. Well, we got up there, and I, for one, already felt pretty creeped out. It was a smaller 2, maybe 3 if you count the really big attic, story house that had the living room, dining room, and kitchens on the first floor, and had 2 bedrooms on the second floor. His grandfather had helped to build the place with the grandfather's dad, and then he lived there for most of his life, working as a tailor in the nearby town. We went up to the attic to get some beach toys, because that's where JB kept all of the stuff so that he didn't have to haul it every time he went out there. Well, when we get up to the attic, I noticed the corner covered in some dust and cobwebs, and about 8 mannequins, just some upper torsos and some full bodies. Not too out of the ordinary, considering that a tailor had lived here. Me and JB's son slept downstairs in the living room on the couch, since there were no more beds. And near midnight-ish, I heard the stairs squeak a few times. I figured it was my mum coming to check to make sure we fell asleep. I told his son to be quiet and quickly turned the TV off and hid underneath the covers. After not hearing any noises for a few minutes, I looked out from under the covers and saw 3 of the mannequins moving around in the kitchen. Like their body parts weren't moving, but they were sliding around the kitchen. I swore I was dreaming, but was so terribly frightened, I hid back under the covers with a small yelp, and then I heard the dragging on the floor coming closer, and peeked out to see one of them just a few inches from the couch. I hid back under the covers and shut my eyes tightly, hoping it would go away. The next morning, I got up and tried not to think about it, really hoping it was just a bad dream. But when we went upstairs to the attic to put the beach stuff back, the mannequins were in different spots and weren't covered in cobwebs anymore. Don't believe me if you don't want to, but it happened, and I have been scared shitless of mannequins ever since. This happened about a month ago. I live alone, and it is extremely rare that I ever feel nervous about being alone. Well, one night, I just had this incredibly uneasy feeling. So much, in fact, even though I'm a smoker, I decided not to smoke before bed as usual. I checked the locks on all my windows and doors before going to bed. I lay down in the bed, but still couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. I eventually fell asleep, and all was good, until I woke up the next morning and noticed my pistol sitting on the dresser. I thought, well, that's weird. I got up and went over to the gun and realized that all of my bullets were missing. Since I live alone, I always keep it loaded, but the bullets were missing. I went and grabbed the box of ammo from the closet, and exactly 5 shells, the shells I used to load the revolver, were missing. At this point I'm freaking out, either thinking that I had maybe woken up in the middle of the night and unloaded the gun or something like that. Well, I had to get my day started, so I went and made some coffee. I needed to empty the garbage, and I took the bag to the can. As I start walking around the house, I instantly freeze. All 5 bullets are scattered on the ground on the back side of my house. The weirdest part is that I hadn't left my house at all the previous day, and all the windows were locked as I checked them the night before. When I was 10 years old, my eldest sister had been married for about a year. She is 10 years older than I am, and my dad had just moved us to a new home. Being the youngest of us all, this was the first time that I had my very own room. I loved it. Before, in our original home, I was always terrified to sleep alone. Anyway, as we had a ghost in our home. And, well, it could be another 15 years before all of our siblings were talking and realized we'd all encountered him the farmer, and we actually called him the farmer because he was dressed in overalls and red and black plaid flannel shirt. But that really is another story, a rather mundane story compared to the one you're listening to tonight. The farmer is only brought up so that you can know that I already knew that ghosts were real and that they wandered among us, the living. I am just trying to give you a little background leading up to the most terrible and unforgettable night of my life. I was 10 years old and sleeping in my room, where I was perfectly comfortable. I had one window in my room, and the foot of my bed was about 3 feet from it. I liked that I had light that came through my window, as it was a natural light for me. A wall which was just 2 or 3 feet to my left, a closet with 2 wooden sliding doors to my lower right, and just by my window, next to that, was a chest of drawers which was just inside the doorway to the hall, which was directly to my right. I had less than 5 feet of space from the headboard of my twin bed to the doorway. So, that's the setup to my room at the time. Anyway, one night, I was sleeping and a noise woke me up next to my bed. I heard hard-soled shoes walking on hardwood floors. So, I slept on my back and I woke up and looked at the window, reasoning with myself that someone was walking outside. Outside being a cement walkway. As I did, I noticed movement. A figure standing directly to the left of me, between my bed and the wall. I looked up, and the figure was mostly solid black, yet I could make out a few details. He had a cape, an outdated, very Victorian-era 3-piece suit, and a top hat, a pointed beard, moustache, pointy nose, and a straight cane in his hand. It reminded me of a complete magician's attire. Suddenly he moved his left hand. I could see a deep red shiny satin lining on the inside of his cape. And then, to add to my horror, I could see a very long pointed dagger in his hand, and he retrieved it from just inside the right side of his cape. As rapidly as I had noticed, he had swished in a circular motion and had the point of the dagger on my throat just below my chin. I tried to scream, but no sound would come out. I was so terrified, I couldn't scream. I thought if I tried to move, I would get my throat slit. But at the same time, knowing that if I didn't move, he was going to slash my throat wide open. I noticed his evil grin, and I could see his teeth as he scowled me. He began to bend himself, and his face was getting closer to me. As I saw him begin to move the blade to plunge into my throat. Quickly, I thought, how am I going to get out of bed? It was as if though thousands of thoughts were racing through my mind, still unable to scream, terrified to move, terrified to not move, when suddenly, in the flash of a fraction of a second, and all at once, in the next split of the next moment, I was on my floor. It was perpendicular to my bed, and I somehow reached up, hoping my hand would find the light switch on my first try. But I looked up, and as I did, I saw that he, or it, whatever this terrifying figure was, had moved with my swift movement, and just as quickly managed to be leaning over my bed, the long slender dagger still in his hand, and on my throat. I swooped my arm upwards, I knew I was right below my light switch. I didn't know how, but my upper body lifted myself just inches away from under the sharp dagger, and my arm reached up high enough. In sheer relief, I managed to get the light on. The very split second the light came on, he dissipated into a cloud of mist. I could barely breathe. There was an odd smell in the room. I jumped, and I flew into my parents' room, standing, shaking, and crying, only inches away from their safety. I sat there until I could see the light from the sun coming up. I prayed every moment that the black entity was truly gone. Staring at the doorway, I sat positioned, ready to pounce on them at the foot of the bed if I saw anything move. I didn't wake them up. I didn't think they'd believe me, and, quite frankly, I didn't want to believe myself. I was out of breath, exhausted, and thought maybe, if I didn't speak of this horrifying event, I could think it were not real. I thought that I could convince myself that it didn't happen, but I knew I was awake. I knew what I saw, and I knew, unfortunately, that it was real. Throughout the rest of that long night, I sat on the bottom edge of my parents' bed, mulling over the horrifying details over and over in my mind. I couldn't lie to myself, and I knew I wasn't dreaming. How did I get out of bed? Did I somehow kick my leg and throw myself onto the floor? It felt like someone had just grabbed my shoulders and pulled me out of bed. But who? That solid black magician under his black cape. The flash of red satin lining, and worse, the silver long dagger. My parents were sleeping and nobody else was there. You might want to say I was dreaming too, or this isn't real. I wish I could tell you that none of this is true, but it does not end there. 2 days later, I was talking to my older sister, who lived in a different state with her new husband. She said she called to tell me about a nightmare she had 2 nights before, the same dreadful night as my horrific ordeal. She had had a frightening and terrible nightmare that she had to talk to me about, because it was so real and she couldn't get it out of her mind. A nightmare about me. She said she woke up crying and screaming. She said that she dreamt she was in her kitchen cooking dinner, and she looked out the back door. The window was actually the top half of her kitchen back door. She said she could see me, laying in the grass next to her vegetable garden, laying on my back watching the clouds float by. Then a man, dressed in all Victorian black, with a top hat and a cape, came up to me carrying a walking stick. She said she saw me look up at him, when suddenly he held a dagger and slashed my throat and began stabbing me repeatedly. She tried to get out to the door, but it was locked and wouldn't open. She was screaming for help. "Someone save my sister!" Her screams woke up her husband, who in turn woke her up. Right outside my bedroom window, that gave me my nightlight, we too had a vegetable garden. Even more creepy was to realize that exactly where my sister had dreamed she saw me laying on my back next to her vegetable garden being stabbed over and over again was the exact same entity that I felt and saw over me. My sister and I live 450 miles apart. Like I said, this still terrifies me to this day. I even think I know why. My best friend and I had played with a Ouija board, and we had no idea what we were conjuring up. It was evil. My auntie is never actually the one who mentions this in the first place, despite it being about her. But everyone else has no problem telling it. I think it's mainly because she's just so indifferent and casual about it. It simply happened to her, and that's just the way it is. Although she is tough as nails, shaven head, tattooed, and is an ambulance driver, so she doesn't get fazed by much. Apparently, throughout all her 3 pregnancies, she saw ghosts, clear as day, who just stood around her house. The figure mentioned most is an old man who would stand at the bottom of the stairs and just constantly stare up. The thing is though, she would only see him from downstairs, so if she was walking down from the 2nd floor, he would not be there. But after, she would pass the point where he stood and look back, and there he'd be. Apparently, as she would always explain in an irritated manner, they have a very narrow house, meaning a very narrow hallway. This is London suburban we're talking about. She would literally just have to walk through him to get upstairs. The second, more creepy one is about my grandmother. Again, I don't think I've ever actually heard her tell this story, but all of her children have mentioned it. Her and her husband decided to do some trip of some kind with another married couple who were 2 of their closest friends. I can't recall where because I haven't heard this story in a while, but I know it was a big old mansion that you could visit and rent rooms like Airbnb. My grandparents were given a room on the bottom floor while their friends were given one on the 2nd floor. After everyone had gone to bed, my grandmother is trying to fall asleep when all of a sudden, the door handle, so we're talking actual door handle, one of those that you push down, so not a doorknob that you twist, starts being furiously pushed up and down repeatedly, like you would to open the door. But the door never opens. It just remains closed, with the handle beating up and down really fast and aggressively. I can't remember if the door is locked, but they were old when this happened, and being in a random B&B, it's possible. Instantly, my grandmother assumes it's their friend, the husband of the couple they came with, because being a childish old man, he is a bit of a prankster, and it stops after a few seconds. So she shakes her head and just continues trying to go back to sleep. Then, after a few minutes, it starts again. This handle just starts being pushed sporadically, so aggressively that it's loud enough to wake up my grandfather. This time, in a typical British fashion, they literally just shout at their friend who thinks is doing it and tells him to bugger off. And that would be fine. But it literally goes on for hours, every now and then, just as intensely. They meet their friends the next morning and are naturally incredibly annoyed and pissed off with them. But their friends remain clueless and, more so, shocked. And the husband swears he did not go near the door. When I was a younger kid, I had a really hard time getting to sleep, and I normally got to bed really late at night. My mum has always been that way too. So, my mum mentioned that she heard something at night and wanted me to stay up a little longer to hear it. I did. It was summer anyway. Fast forward to that night. It's about 1 in the morning. My mum said it usually happens during her nighttime routine. So she told me to sit in the living room and listen while she went to brush her teeth. That's when I heard it. There were footsteps upstairs. You could hear the footsteps start at the window in my parents' room, then walk away towards the other bedroom, my baby sister's. It sounded muffled until the footsteps arrived to the landing of the stairs. Then it got louder because the landing was hardwood floor. After a few steps, then you would hear the footsteps on the carpet again when they arrived at my sister's room. By this time, they didn't go all the way to the window. They went to my sister's crib and paused for a moment, before continuing back to the window in my parents' room. I listened to this for about 5 to 10 minutes, with the footsteps taking about a minute to go from the window to the crib and back. My mum then came out of the bathroom and said, "I told you I heard something." Well, we then opened the door and it stopped completely for the night, as far as we know. The next night I do the same thing and hear it again. So I open up the door and send our dogs, a German Shepherd and a Border Collie, up to investigate, who get to the top of the stairs and immediately turn around and bolt down again. My stepdad was there that night and quickly ran upstairs after the dogs came down to look everywhere. There was not a single place he didn't look. There was nothing to be found, and the windows were still locked. Couldn't explain it for years, and the neighbors that moved in after us apparently heard the same footsteps. When I was around the age of 4, my parents got a divorce, and I ended up living with my brother and my mum. We also moved to the US, as I was born in Mexico, and stayed in a 2-story house. At the time, my mum was in med school studying to become a nurse. She was in her late 20s, so she worked pretty late. One day, my brother and I were visiting my dad, so she was home alone. She was in her room when she heard the doorknob continuously twist, but no one entered. She was really confused, so she went to check who was causing it, thinking it was my grandma. But when she opened the door, there was no one there. The twisting then started and stopped after a minute. My mum's heart was pounding. She went to check again, now thinking it was my aunt, who used to visit a lot, playing a sick prank on her. Again, no one was there. She went back and sat on the bed, ready to call my grandma, when the doorknob started twisting again, harsher this time. My mum's only thought was that someone had broken into her house and was trying to enter her room. She quickly ran into the closet and hid. She dialed my grandma's, her mother's number, and through tears started explaining what was happening and that someone was trying to enter her room. My grandma called my aunt, who called my other aunt, who called the police. And after about 10 minutes, the cops show up and started searching the house, only to find no signs of intrusion. One of the cops asked my mum if she got enough sleep, since she saw her school uniform. My mum says that she got at least 4 hours every day, and the cops started telling her that she was probably just imagining it and that she needed more sleep. But my mum told the cop that it was not in her imagination and that it genuinely did happen. Another day, my mum was watching TV in her room when it turned off by itself. She turned it back on and took a shower. When she was done, she came back to find it turned off again. One night, my aunt had stayed in my room while I was with my dad. My mum had told her not to open the bathroom window because it didn't have a screen and the bugs tended to fly in. The next morning, my mum found the bathroom window fully opened, so she walked over to my aunt and started yelling at her. My aunt told her that she was 100% sure that she never opened it, but my mum didn't believe her. Up to this day, my aunt swears that she never did it. The second day of my aunt's visitation, she again stayed in my bedroom, which was not fully decorated. So there were buckets of paint and other stuff there. My mum woke up to an odd sound coming from my room and went to check on it when she came across my aunt, wide-eyed, standing in front of the wall with a bucket of paint and a paintbrush in her hand. When my mum realized that she was painting the wall, she confusedly asked, "Why are you painting the wall at this time?" To which my aunt replied, "I can't sleep. I feel like someone is watching me." So my mum just told her to sleep with her. One of the last encounters consisted of my mum waking up to the sound of crying coming from my room. She went to check on me and found me sitting on my bed crying. She asked me what was wrong, and I looked at her and said, "There's a man in the corner of the room, watching me." My mum turned to the dark corner and saw nothing, but it freaked her the hell out because of everything that had already happened, and because kids are usually the ones who are able to see spirits. Upon hearing this, my mum grabbed me and my brother and got the hell out of there. We stayed at my grandma's house for some time. Since the neighbour's son went to our school, my brother and he got along pretty well, and he would usually hang out at his house. One day, my mum went to the neighbour's house to pick up my brother when my neighbour's mother, Amy, asked my mum if she could speak to her the next day. My mother agreed. The next day, my mum went to Amy's house while my brother and Amy's son were at school. Amy told my mum to sit down and asked her if she was experiencing any unusual stuff. My mum was surprised to hear this, but nodded. As Amy was getting ready to ask another question, her husband George walked in and said, "Oh, you're finally telling her about the ghost." My mum was really confused, but Amy just narrowed her eyes at George. Amy started telling my mum that she had been experiencing paranormal activity since the day they arrived. She told my mum that in the house we were living in, there used to be a man who burned to death. She said he was an evil spirit, full of anger and hate, who wanted my mum to get out of the house. You see, the man also haunted Amy's house regularly, often moving both her son's stuff and misplacing it. There would sometimes be strange smells, and her cat would act very differently. The older son knew about it, but the younger one did not, because Amy didn't want to scare him. It even got to a point where the man would physically hurt the family by scratching them. One day, Amy saw a vase fall, and she thought it was the cat. But the cat was sound asleep, and there's no way it could have been someone, because there was nobody home. Amy even got to see the ghost, which traumatized her. She told my mum, "You see those brown curtains?" To which my mother nodded. They used to be white. But one day, as I was walking through the hallway, I turned to face the curtains and saw the ugliest man I have ever seen standing behind them. He had charred skin and had the most sinister looking face I've ever seen. He always used to stand there, so I changed the curtains to brown so that we wouldn't see him. All my mum was thinking about was that she had to get the hell out of that house. But she couldn't, due to signing some contract that said she had to live there for 5 months before being able to move out, as we'd only been living there for 2. My mum told Amy to get out of there as well, but Amy said that she couldn't because she'd already bought the house. I think we stayed at my grandma's house for the remaining 3 months, but after the 5th month passed, we started packing everything up. The scariest part was that my mum used to have a glass table that she absolutely loved. While the moving company workers were carrying it out, they accidentally dropped it and shattered it to pieces. Of course, my mum was very angry, but she soon learned that if it wasn't for those workers shattering the glass table, the spirit man would have followed us to the new house. I don't know if you've ever heard that the shattering of glass can free a spirit, but that was exactly what happened. The workers shattered the glass table, and the spirit of the man was freed, because it was like he was attached to the glass table, ready to move to the new house with us. Well, let's start out by telling you that my name is Jared. I am a friend that always loves to hang out all the time, and my parents were out of town, so my best friend and his son came over to hang out. His name is Daniel. So we went to Walmart to grab snacks and dinner, and we get back to my house, and something didn't feel right. Fortunately, my buddy isn't scared of anything, so he checked the house, but no one was there. But I could see his son was still scared for some reason. And all 3 of our favourite band is Metallica, so I put it on to get our mind off it. Daniel was cooking dinner, and the lights started flickering on and off, and we looked at each other and said, "That's weird." And his son started to get scared, because like us, he likes scary movies, so his mind instantly went to the worst idea. But we didn't pay it any mind, so we started talking about ex-girlfriends, and his son was still scared, so we just brought the food to my room, and his son and me were playing some PS4 or Xbox. Then his son heard a loud bang followed by my dogs barking and growling, and I told my friend, "Did you hear that shit?" And he said, "No, I hear your dogs." And his son got scared again, and I said, "Shh, listen." Suddenly, a loud 3 bangs on my door starts bang, bang, bang. And he said, "I heard it. I'll check." And I said, "I'll go with you. And I have 2 shotguns by my bed." And I handed him one. And I took one. And we told his son to lock the room. "Don't answer unless we tell you." And he started getting more scared. So he took middle. Daniel, his dad, was in the front with the shotgun, and I'm in the back looking in the other direction with a shotgun, but walking backwards his way, not to split up, and make sure his kids are okay and safe. And we checked the house top to bottom. Nothing. So we played it off as a power surge and went back to my room. We heard 3 loud bangs again. Bang, bang, bang at my door. But this time we were ready. I threw open the door, and my friend stuck the shotgun out the door, and he jumped back in my room and said, "Come on, Jared, come stay at our house." So I got the dogs to my sister's and left. But as I was backing out the driveway, I see a tall black figure that wasn't human fly past the kitchen window. So I asked when I got to his house what he saw. He said he wouldn't tell me in front of his son. I asked him what he saw once his son was asleep, and he told me that he saw the face of evil. It was staring at me from the kitchen, and it smiled an evil grin. And that's all I'm saying. I asked him for more, but he wouldn't talk. And I've never seen my friend so scared in his life. Here are a few stories from my family. My granddad was cycling home one night from seeing my grandma back in the late 1940s in Yorkshire. If anyone knows the area, it's near Bishop Wilton in the Garrowby Hill area, if anyone knows it. They lived a few miles from each other on different farms, and he was cycling on home. It wasn't ridiculously late, but it was dark and still late enough so that there weren't many people about. But it was a clear night with a large moon. He was cycling down this road and suddenly happened upon a man riding a horse in what I think he described as full riding gear. He said hello to the man and rode alongside him for a while, and the man remained silent. Suddenly, the man disappeared, and my granddad rode home quickly in fright. He ran inside, and his dad asked him what was wrong, and he was white as a sheet. And then before he could tell him, he said, "You've seen the horseman, haven't you?" I've heard the tale from my granddad, and my mum heard it from him and her granddad, who was my granddad's father. I have a couple more. About a year later, my granddad was at my granny's farm at about 11 p.m. having drinks with her sisters and brothers and their friends. The farm is in the middle of nowhere and miles from anywhere. And it was quite a large farm, being quite a distance from the farmhouse to the road. They were in the farmhouse kitchen with a small window open, as it was a hot summer night. All of a sudden, a gunshot went through the small window, missing one of the men's heads by a couple of inches, going into the wall. The men all ran out into the fields looking for whoever it was, while the women locked up, as they never locked anything in those days. They never found out who it was, and some of them thought that it could have just been poachers, but it was an arable farm, and it seems as though it must have been aimed. So the shooter must have been fairly close to make that shot, so surely would have known they were aiming at a house. So they had an assumption it was a purposeful shot to scare. It's just this image of someone in the dark, spying on them and watching them in this bright kitchen that creeps me out. They thought the house was all well, as it was very creepy, and they used to hear things. They would hear people banging pots and pans in the kitchen when no one was in. and as a large farmhouse, it had very many dark corners and alleyways. My auntie also had an experience in York. She was walking down a street about 15 years ago, near the King's Arm pub, and suddenly, everything changed for 2 minutes. She thinks she had a time slip, as everyone was suddenly dressed in olden clothing, and the buildings had changed, and were all old-fashioned. She said no one noticed her in her modern clothes, and it was just altogether eerie. A friend of mine's house burnt to the ground when I was younger, and his family moved across the street in a house that they rented for a bit. The basement in said house was unfurnished and unfinished, so being middle schoolers, we decided that we could use the basement to ride skateboards and scooters. So, after one night of skateboarding, we head upstairs to watch scary movies and pass out. Neither of his parents nor his sister were home. We went to his grandparents for the night, if I remember correctly. As we were getting close to sleep, we hear as something hit the ground really hard on the concrete of the basement. So, being dumb teenagers, we decide to investigate. As we open the door to the basement and peer down, we just see a skateboard floating in mid-air. We sit and watch it for a few seconds, and then it drops suddenly and violently, hitting the ground loudly. Needless to say, we packed our shit up and sprinted back to my house. Not much sleeping happened that night. His family moved out soon after, and we tend to avoid that house as much as possible. Bonus story. This didn't happen to me, but I saw it happen, and it made me question my non-belief of the supernatural. Last time I was in New Orleans, I took a couple of friends to the Marie Laveau Voodoo Museum, which my friend Jessica was not too impressed by. Later that day, we were walking back to the Airbnb apartment that we had rented and wandered past a house that had one of those historic location plaques on it. Turns out, that house had been Marie Laveau's father's home. As we were all standing out there in front of the house, Jessica is complaining about how shitty she thought the museum was. And at that very moment, her brand new Galaxy S5 went flying out of her hands and landed a good 5 feet away, totally destroyed. I was looking right at her when it happened. She didn't trip. She wasn't wildly throwing her arms around. There was no explanation for why her phone would have taken a leap like that. Just thinking of the physics, it's impossible. Also, it wasn't just a little scratched up, like it had been dropped. It looked like it had exploded from within. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Just a heads up that tomorrow, yes, tomorrow, I am going to be hosting a live stream with my friend CZ's World and Lady White Rabbit. I would really love to see some of you amazing guys there with me. You can find all the information in the description, and drop a comment if you think you can make it. I really hope to see some of you guys there. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a big thumbs up and consider subscribing for even more scary stories every day. And finally, don't forget to click the little bell icon to get notified every time I upload. If you'd like me to read your story on my channel, feel free to send it to my email or share it to my Reddit, which is of course in the description. Please make sure to include as much punctuation and description as possible, and paragraphs are extremely important to maximize the chances of your story being read in a video. Oh, and my brother has uploaded another video on his history-based YouTube channel. It would mean a lot to me if you guys could check it out. I'll leave a link on screen. I'm pretty sure you'll all enjoy it. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.